Well, thank you to my dear friend Bob Bird for that overly generous welcome. It's a tremendous privilege to be with you here today on the eve of World Polio Day on Thursday. When our founding fathers of Confederation concluded their work in the creation of this great country 157 years ago, do you think that they regarded their service to the country as unfinished, or the portrait painted and the pie baked? I think all of us in this room would agree that it was the former, as meritorious Canadians from all walks of life over the past 16 decades have worked against what in 1867 must have seemed like impossible odds to expand Canada's footprints of social justice, democratic principles, geography, welcome, multiculturalism, and human dignity. However, now we find ourselves living in a time when populism, nationalism, barriers, economic disparity, fear, intolerance are combining to impair the sort of vision around the globe that served to build countries such as Canada and to affix that dreaded two-letter prefix to the word possible. So on the one hand, we have vision, and on the other hand, we have withdrawal. How can we make a difference in the midst of all that? Rosabeth Moss Kanter, Dean of Harvard's Advanced Leadership Chair, said that a vision is not just a picture of what could be, it is an appeal to our better selves, a call to become something more. So it is against this backdrop that I would like to shout out a bravo to the storied history of Picton Rotary Club number 5622 and what you represent. And a second bravo for the Rotary mission, service above self by promoting integrity and advancing world understanding, goodwill, and peace. I salute you, the members and leaders. Volunteerism and service require time to be diverted from families and careers, professions, studies, hobbies, and calendars. And in a world seemingly increasingly motivated by a learn, earn, and burn trilogy, why should each of you take time from your busy lives to care about others? Especially if you, by doing so, threaten simply to slip further behind the career pack and or diminish family time experiences. Is it an impossible confluence of motivation, this word called service? John Stuart Mill, that iconic English economist, politician, civil servant, and one of the most influential philosophers of the 19th century and creative thinkers in the history of social theory, wrote 175 years ago that real citizenship is a life-transforming vocation. And today in 2024, society is finally demanding that companies, both public and private, also serve a social purpose. To prosper over time, corporations are expected to not only deliver financial performance, but also show how to make a positive contribution to society. Bill Gates, the second richest man in the world, said that when I was in my 20s and building Microsoft, I was a zealot. I didn't believe in weekends. I didn't believe in vacations. I knew everybody's license plates, so I knew when they were coming and going. That was my life. But he said, I was also under the impression that in spite of all this hype, that the world was becoming a darker place. But when Bill and Melinda Gates founded the world's largest charitable foundation, one of their motivating factors was a book written by Steven Pinker entitled Better Angels of Our Nature, which confirmed that things are getting better. And that is the greatest story, according to Bill Gates, that no one knows. Now, he could have been talking about the members of Picton Rotary. And there are 46,000 sister clubs around the world, which comprise, I understand, Bob, almost 1,400,000 Rotarians who are dedicated to this word service. In the summer of 1921, a 39-year-old vital and ambitious politician, athlete, and intellect, swimming at his family's beloved summer compound on Campobello Island, New Brunswick, having just served for 7 years as Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one afternoon experienced a sudden fever and ascending paralysis, bowel and bladder dysfunction, numbness and hyperesthesia. Polio had struck another victim. A more public subsequent figure you cannot imagine. But after years of painful therapy and rehab, try if you can to find one picture of him while serving as President of the United States between 1933 and 1945, which shows his leg braces. As in those days, a politician had to conceal any sign of weakness which such a disability would convey. So as a polio survivor, I thank Rotary from the bottom of my heart for your leadership in the eradication of this dread virus. As you know, polio is an infectious disease caused by a virus that, once it invades the nervous system, can cause irreversible paralysis in a matter of hours. It is only found in humans, and its primary transmission is fecal-oral, whereby drinking water is contaminated by the feces of someone carrying the virus. And as a result, many polio victims suffer from a permanent paralysis of their legs. And in the worst cases, when the virus affected the muscles used to breathe, the victim could suffocate and die. For those latter victims, as you know, iron lungs, large mechanical breathing apparatuses, were created, which became either a lifeline or a life sentence for those permanently paralyzed. Polio can be divided into three phases. The first is the endemic stage, which really is from antiquity to the 19th century. The endemic stage to the mid-20th century, and the vaccine stage from 1955 onwards. As you know, FDR went on to found the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which became known as the March of Dimes, a symbolic reference to those polio victims unable to walk, and an act as an appeal for the nickels and dimes of citizens around the world in search of a cure. A medical doctor and virologist by the name of Jonas Salk put forward an inactivated polio vaccine in 1953. His supervisor, Thomas Francis, insisted upon introducing a control group into that trial design, which, as an aside, was a major step towards the development of randomized control tests in medicine. 2 years later, on the 10th anniversary of Franklin Roosevelt's death, April the 12th, 1955, Salk's vaccine was found to be effective and potent in preventing polio. Millions of Americans who were anxiously following the medical conference announcing the results on the national radio spontaneously laid down their work and celebrated in the streets. When asked that day in a national press conference who owned the patent to the vaccine, Dr. Salk said, "Well, the people, I would say. Can you patent the sun?" And here's a wonderful book written by Jane Smith about Dr. Salk, and it's entitled Patenting the Sun. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Albert Sabin introduced a live polio vaccine that would be administered orally, the OPV, in contrast to Dr. Salk's that required an injection. And that dramatically reduced the cost and increased access to the vaccine. And whereby Salk's protected the central nervous system, Sabin's protected the digestive tract, thereby preventing the spread of wild poliovirus more effectively. Now, as you know better than me, Rotary founded Polio Plus in 1985 and was a founding member of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative of the World Health Assembly in 1988. Rotary members have contributed more than $2.1 billion in countless volunteer hours to almost 3 billion children affected in 122 countries and encourage governments to contribute another $10 billion in support of the cause. And in 2007, that same Bill Gates issued a $100 million challenge to Rotary in matching funds, given that as recently as 1980, hundreds of thousands of people worldwide were becoming paralyzed annually. Now, polio cases over the last 35 years have been reduced by 99.9% worldwide. I would say, give yourself a round of applause, Rotary. You've led the charge. Bob Bird, amazing. What an incredible achievement. But if eradication efforts were to cease within 10 years, the world would again experience 200,000 cases annually. And as we know from recent tragic carnage of Gaza and the malfeasance of countries like Afghanistan, that dread virus still lives. I was spared the requirement of an iron lung or the loss of full mobility or death, as the virus only affected my left leg. And apparently, as advised by our dear old family doctor, Al McClellan, so many years ago, came within a millimeter of affecting both of my legs. But I was the beneficiary of loving parents, siblings, grandparents, and friends, and of course, subsequently, the love and affection of my wonderful wife, Kirstine, and our 3 sons and grandchildren. Unlike many others, polio did not interrupt my life. And I had the advantage, therefore, of growing up with it, not knowing anything different. I think of Franklin Roosevelt in the middle of his life, how it changed. But my strong and beautiful mother, who was an English war bride who crossed the Atlantic during the Battle of the Atlantic in 1944 with my 3-year-old brother and expecting my sister, never forgave herself for feeling that somehow she had exposed me to that polio virus when I was 9 months old in 1946, which then necessitated a 12-month quarantine in Hamilton General Hospital. Now, I, of course, have no memory of this, but equally after my father's return to civilian life after serving for 6 years with the Royal Canadian Artillery in the Second World War overseas, when friends or colleagues asked him how he was doing, this resolute man who had faced real dangers in life had to rush out of the room in tears. I mention this because Newton proved in his 3rd law, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the scourge of the polio virus not only took an immense toll on its victims, but that price was paid many times over by the parents and families of those victims. For example, just as I was admitted to Hamilton General Hospital, my father was transferred to Kingston. But he and my mother, every Saturday for 9 months, would leave my brother and sister in Kingston and drive the 6 hours that it took one way on Highway 2, some of it unpaved, to get to Hamilton General Hospital in order to see me just briefly being held by a nursing sister through the glass partition. Now, I received my first leg brace at age 3. I remember being terrified at the sound of the electric saw and the sight of the electric saw as Mr. Fox, our longtime orthopedic brace maker, cut the plaster mold away from my leg. Sensation apparently repeated a week or so later when my father took me to the barber and he brought out the electric clippers. But that brace gave me mobility and a certain sense of freedom and an encouragement to get on with things. And later, as a young schoolboy, it eventually dawned on me, and not in the best way, that I was different. And I used to walk to school through the back alleys in order to avoid seeing my reflection in a pane glass window, which marked me as different. And as well, any unintended meeting with occasional taunting bullies. One day, to my utter astonishment, whilst dreading the approach of two such toughs, the biggest kid in our school popped out of nowhere, told them that if they ever looked at me sideways again, they would regret it. Equally, when my mother insisted that I must attend Mrs. Rankin's ballroom dancing classes in grade 9 on Friday night, all the consequential horrors that I had assumed came to naught as the girls kindly pretended to ignore my differences and filled up my dance card. Our next door neighbor made me a fixed wheel bicycle, which opened a wonderful new chapter of freedom. And Carl Elioff, who then was the head physiotherapist for the Toronto Maple Leafs, by a serendipitous introduction, made me a pair of skates to fit over my brace. I wasn't fast, but I could be included in the game. In my 20s, my beloved bride and my brother encouraged me to take up downhill skiing. After the first weekend, they wanted to hire me as the hill groomer because I spent most of it on my nose. But a dear friend introduced us to track 3 skiing at Banff in Sunshine in Banff, where after encouraging us to come out an hour before the lifts open, they would ski backwards down the hill with a video camera and instruction. And at the end of the week, when I went to go to pay them, they would not take any payment because they said, I can ski. And that is all the payment that they required, which opened up 25 years of skiing with our family in North America and Europe. That was truly freedom 25. But these are moments one does not forget. They stay with you for a lifetime, and they remind us that people are decent and people are kind. Now, Bob asked me today to speak briefly about Special Olympics, the value of intellectually handicapped citizens to our communities, and the power each and every one of us has to change the world, just as Rotary has done that with polio. After praying for many years as a young boy that God the Father would heal my physical deficiencies, I realized that He had given me a task in life and, as His way, equipped me with tools of understanding and empathy to pass on some of this splendid kindness and support and inclusion that I had received in my life to others. It's turned out to be a joyous journey, as I know you've all experienced in your service. Not only was a burden lifted from me, but I've met the most vibrant and splendid volunteer travelers as government, corporate, and community leaders along the way. Now, in Special Olympics today, we take joy at the opportunity given to the intellectually and developmentally disabled to bring through sport, through training, and through competition, their honesty, their gifts, their accomplishments, and their emerging self-confidence and realization that there is a powerful, sun-filled place in our society for who they are and the positive lessons that they teach us all. Now, 50 years ago, as you know, that was not the case. Mostly the words intellectually disabled and joy did not occupy the same sentence. Rather, it was completed with words like burden and regret. Someone with an intellectual disability just looked different, and the injustice of that was something to which I was drawn. Boys and girls, men and women with intellectual disabilities today are no longer condemned to a life of flaccidity at the back of the house with the shutters drawn. Local, regional, national, international games take place, but every Special Olympics athlete trains year-round, 2 or 3 times a week, and one of Special Olympics' 32 accredited sports, participates in health initiatives, school-based programs, and hometown games, which all contribute to the mission of promoting well-being and inclusion. In 1998, I found myself on a platform in Halifax with Kirstine at the opening ceremonies of the Canadian Special Olympics Summer Games. On my left was Anne Murray. On my right was Dr. Frank Savage, the Premier of the province. "Oh, yes," said the Premier, "how far we have come. Because when I was a country doctor back in the 60s and 50s, what we did then was prescribe a lobotomy. Special Olympics, through the leadership and dedication of thousands of volunteers and volunteer certified coaches, has allowed intellectually disabled citizens around the world to share with society their incredible gifts of selflessness, their capacity for forgiveness, their integrity, and their determination. And today, over 5 million people with an intellectual or developmental disability participate in Special Olympics programs in over 172 countries around the world, 43 of which reside in Canada, supported by over 20,000 volunteers. So exclusion has become inclusion, difference has become exceptional, and what the world was for so very long quick to discard has become precious. And we come back full circle because that's something which their own parents, who are the true heroes in this story, knew all along. As we all know around this table, anything worthwhile in life requires industry and conviction. But as we expanded the Special Olympics programs, we outran the funding. Does it sound familiar? So, like Rotary, we needed to be creative and energetic. So one day, 30 years ago, I found myself in the office of Sheila Copps. You might remember Sheila Copps from Hamilton, Liberal cabinet minister. She was Minister of Heritage, which also meant she was Minister of Sport. And I was asking for the federal government's assistance in funding Special Olympics, which I was trying to explain was the third leg of the Olympic stool in concert with Canada's Olympic and Paralympic athletes. Now, as my allotted time wound down in Sheila Copps' office, she asked me to go down the hall and meet with her Director General of Sport, a non-elected and, as it turned out, non-empathetic individual who scoffed at my suggestion as he explained, as he rushed me out the door, that the government only funded real athletes. 2 weeks later, I found myself back in Minister Copps' office. I was really appalled by this turn of events and was determined to try to do something about it. And to my absolute delight, 6 weeks later, Kirstine and I found ourselves sitting in the visitors' gallery of the House of Commons as Mr. Speaker asked the entire Special Olympics Canada Summer Games team to stand up and be recognized in the House. Following which, we went to the magnificent Speaker's residence just off the floor of the House for a reception. And that's an event which, to this day, has become an annual celebration with much valued support from the federal government. Neither will we ever forget along the way entering the Guinness Book of Records for attendance at an annual sit-down breakfast. This was a sports celebrities festival for Special Olympics breakfast. The year the Sky Dome opened, at the Sky Dome, Kirstine chaired that event, only to have the power fail when the coffee urns were turned on. So you get the picture. You know what it's like when that it doesn't work. Or the time when the rental tuxedos for Vince Carter, the Hall of Fame basketball player, and Jerry Howarth, the beloved but rather short in stature, longtime Blue Jays radio announcer, were reversed. They presented themselves as the long and the short of it at the dinner. It was quite amusing. Nor the lesson of living in the same federated model that we live in as citizens of Canada, when national and provincial powers often clash. The Special Olympics Canada model is the federated model. And when I became chair, I was overwhelmed by the negativity across the country about the central national body. So I convened 4 different meetings across the country with the leadership of each of our 10 provincial and 2 territorial chapters. And what we determined after these meetings, listening to their complaints, was that they all boil down to 2 issues, one of which was a misunderstanding, and the second one was easily fixed. So these are tools that we use in service. And speaking of fundraising, I just want to leave you with a great memory when raising money for the inaugural foundation of the Anglican Diocese of Toronto's Good Steward Foundation. We did a similar thing. There are 300 parish churches in the Anglican Diocese of Toronto. It goes all the way from Collingwood down through Peterborough and close to Coburg. But of course, every parish rector was concerned that if we made an appeal for a diocesan foundation, the money would come right off the plate. So what we did was the Archbishop and I and our committee convened 5 different meetings. We carved up the 300 parishes and we answered their questions. We listened to them and we tried to accommodate their concerns. Listening is a big tool of service. But during those days of creating that Good Steward Foundation, a very good friend of mine by the name of Michael Burns, a fellow volunteer, shared a story with our committee about the need always to ask for the right amount. So he talked about his father, Charlie Burns, who at the time was chairman of the Bank of Montreal. He also sat on the Toronto General Hospital Foundation Board. And he had a particular friend that he'd long had in mind who should pony up for the Toronto General Hospital Foundation. And when Charlie thought the time was right, he sat down with his friend. And to Charlie's horror, the friend shook his head at $1 million, but wrote a check out for $500,000. And Charlie Burns was so infuriated that he took the check and he ripped it in half. Over coffee the next morning, reading his morning paper in the obits, he learned that his friend had suffered a fatal heart attack the night before. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, he was at the main branch of the Bank of Montreal, meekly in front of a teller, asking for some Scotch tape. So, what do these stories represent? They represent believing in your cause, knowing how and when to say thank you, how and when to press your case, as well as the benefits of laughter and patience and listening. These are tools that you've all applied in your wonderful work. And it allows you, the members of Picton Rotary, who know service does something else. It allows us, the volunteers, to become better people, to become the very best we can be, because we're not doing it for ourselves. It teaches us if that service is beneath us, then leadership is above us. The world is changed by our example, not really by our opinion. And as Jim Rohn said, if you're not willing to risk the extraordinary, then you're going to be stuck with the ordinary. Which brings me back full circle to you, the leaders and members of Picton Rotary. A collective good that's been achieved over the past 81 years in Picton would not have been possible without your extraordinary volunteer leadership and financial support, and the legacy of leadership that Rotarians over the years have left. So I salute you, and may you continue to be galvanized in your call to action, encouraged in your journey to embrace life, and quest to tackle the impossible. In the words of Muhammad Ali, impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible isn't a declaration, it's a dare. Impossible is really potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. Thank you, and God bless you.